Harry, I always like these David and Goliath stories when individuals who they don't have resources of billions of dollars go against the Trump regime. They stand up for their rights when the Trump regime throws everything against them, and they may have setbacks here and there, but they ultimately prevail. The Mahmoud Khalil situation, I think, is one of those stories. It was one of the first examples that we saw. Now it's become almost an everyday occurrence of ICE and immigration enforcement and DHS and people who we don't even know if they're having badges or who they are. Maybe they're deputized, patrolling the streets and disappearing human beings for whatever arbitrary and capricious reason the Trump regime wants to give. Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University student who had written dissertations on political views and other views regarding Palestine, who was there in the protests supporting Palestine, that had been a major target of the Trump regime. They disappeared him. And then it seems that there was lots of updates about he was first held in an immigration area, and then he was held over here. And then finally, we got this ruling by a federal judge in New Jersey that we heard on Friday, saying that he could be released. How is this different, though, Harry, from the other stories that we had heard kind of along the way? Because there always seemed to be updates that were happening about his release or him being transferred to a certain location. What are the next steps now that has to deal with him? Does the Trump regime still try to deport him? Do they still bring charge? What's happening?
Yeah.
The headline is he got released.
The headline is he got released, and that's a headline for him. He's been, as you say, the longest held guy. I think it dates to March 8th. That's a week before the whole Abrego Garcia mess. While he's been in jail, his American wife has had a baby whom he's never seen. So just being out, that's a big thing. But it's only on bail. So very briefly, to recap the bidding, they first tried in front of this judge in New Jersey, Judge Fabriars, this very kind of almost sinister Orwellian power. This is Rubio saying, I don't have to tell you why, but it hurts the national security for this guy, who has said, by the way, that, he had a role in the demonstrations, but a sort of organizing role, not one that, was in any way interfering with their students or anti-Semitic or the like. That's the claim. And the administration doesn't seem to really have the goods otherwise. But the judge said, that's just too much discretion to give the Secretary of State no reasons. I strike that down. And he would have been free that day, except the United States tries to play its sort of safety net, a backup assertion that he was not fully candid or he somehow falsified his entry papers when he came to the States. Something to do with not being fully forthcoming about some of the work he had done in the Middle East. So that's still the fight they're having. But Fabriars, who, as you say, he said, I've got jurisdiction here. He's taken a real interest in the case when the United States has tried to fight it. He said, yes, I'm giving him bail. I don't see him as a flight risk, but he said something else, which is, your now assertion of trying to deport him because of falsification of his entry papers is, quote, very, very, both those he said, both varies, unusual. So what the judge is really suggesting is you, United States, having lost this first point, are now just trying, as they do all the time, to kind of, this is what they did with Abrego Garcia, right? Get their way anyway, or snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But he's given strong indication, this judge, that now with Khalil out, now they'll go to trial, and the United States will say, you falsified your documents, we can get rid of you. And he'll say, he says two things. One, I didn't, and we have to see the papers and see where the argument is. But the second one is, come on. this is not what you deport people for, and that's what it's going to be an argument over. It's tricky because you know this, Ben. Generally in the law, you're not able to say, well, you never do this. Now, why are you picking on me? Typically, the courts will say, that's the way it goes. You can't complain that other people it wasn't enforced on. But this judge, anyway, seems ready to say, why can't you? Because it's a pretext, because you're lying, administration. You really want to do it for another reason. That's why it matters that you never do it here. So that, I think, is the fight that's going to be happening. It could take a while, as these things tend to do. And the big point is, while it takes a while, he's now at liberty. He's back with his family. He's back with his newborn. And that's something the United States tried to resist at every turn. So in that sense, it's a big but a temporary victory for him.
Pretext. We're going to be hearing that a lot as you and I now analyze a lot of these cases where the Trump regime has targeted high-profile people, whether it's Congresswoman McIver, also in New Jersey, who got arrested for showing up at the Delaney Hall, one of these ICE facilities, private jail facilities, whether it is the judge in Wisconsin, whether it is the New York City comptroller, whether it, I could keep going on and on and on of all of these people who have been now targeted by ICE and kind of Trump's Gestapo. So after they get arrested, they often get charged with something and then double, triple, quadruple down on what they're doing. I mean, look, I even think about what you and I covered last week with Abrego Garcia in the Middle District of Tennessee proceedings, which is after facilitating his return as ordered by the United States Supreme Court. The United States government basically found two individuals who were also undocumented, who were felons, people who had been deported 5 times, who had 30-year prison sentences for actually being the worst of the worst criminals, who then the government negotiated deals to put them in halfway homes if they would agree to testify against Abrego Garcia, where you even had the United States attorney arguing that matter. And the federal judge, the magistrate judge rather, was like, wait a minute, this whole thing is based on 2 felons or a person who's been deported 5 times. But we see this in all of these cases, these pretextual grounds. And I want to get your reaction to that, because you were a United States attorney. That means you were the top federal prosecutor in the Western District of Pennsylvania. You were also one of the top DOJ officials in Main Justice in Washington, D.C. So you've held pretty much, other than the Attorney General, I mean, just so people know who you are, you've pretty much held the top of the top positions in the DOJ at all those different levels. Having discretion in what types of cases you bring, not embarrassing yourself. The idea that the DOJ looks like bad lemon law lawyers who I used to see show up in court on the docket, and I'd sit there. No offense, I'm sure there are good ones, but the bad ones, the scammy lemon law lawyers or whoever who I'd watch, in the morning docket of my civil cases in Stanley Mosque in LA. And I'd be wondering how these people pass the bar exam. Like, what am I even watching? That's the DOJ now, Harry Litman.
It is. And I'm here to tell you, it wasn't when we were there. And I think it's a really important development, Ben, and you're right to throw in these other cases. And I would add, Young, the Reagan appointee, who said, I've never seen such racial discrimination. I would add Burroughs, who has the sort of Sudan third-party ones. What's basically happening here is and this is what I was talking about when I was at DOJ, a general presumption. So judges, even if they're a little bit, their spider sense doesn't like it, they give the DOJ the benefit of the doubt. It would be kind of stunning, or it would have been stunning a year or more ago for them to come out and say, yeah, I hear you, but I don't believe you. And that veneer that is so important for the department that they can take into every battle is wearing off, and quickly. So you've not only, so this is what I meant about, say, Burroughs, Not only do you have courts increasingly saying, we saw, what was it in May, 26 of 27 went against them, but they are also pushing back and emboldened to say, yeah, I don't know if I give you the benefit of the doubt, even if that's what the law says. And look, it matters, A, for the results, but it also matters because it's true. Shameful, disgraceful, heartbreaking for me as a DOJ alum, but you have people going in front of them saying any kind of shit, at least if Ed Martin Jr. or Alina Habba are deciding. And courts, especially certain courts like the ones in D.C., which tried all the January 6 cases only to have the Trump come in and on his first day pardon everybody, they are pushing back. They're not completely saying you've got no credit. And in fact, the Ninth Circuit case we talked about in another YouTube today, Ben, is one where they kind of give the executive the normal benefit of the doubt, but that really valuable litigation kind of arrow in their quiver or advantage is wearing off. And it matters in the law, but it also matters in the country, or at least in the whole sort of legal world, because, you know, people are understanding this is an unusual, maybe unprecedented administration that you cannot give the benefit of the doubt to. And even if the law sort of says that way, there are ways that courts push back, and they are.
Harry Littman, I think it's important to contextualize the Mahmoud Khalil situation, as we just did with all of this that's going on, because I'm with you. You know, I never, sometimes, you know, in my private practice, when I used to practice, you could be frustrated at what the DOJ does. Some of their moves sometimes seem so ultra aggressive, you know, and some of the tactics that they would do that you would be like, that's unfair, that's BS, right, or what. But you never doubted that those lawyers were the top lawyers and that they were tough adversaries. You never looked at him and said, yeah, they're real idiots. Like you would say, these are smart people, and you may not like some of
with
the
integrity. They will not put their career on the line by saying something that is false, right?
And now you look at it, and you have Alina Habba in New Jersey, and a bunch of, you know, versions of that, you know, across the less well known, but like that, and you're like, and it's important, I think, people hear it from you, because you were there and a leader at Maine Justice. So Harry runs the Talking Feds YouTube channel. So after you watch this video on YouTube, you just go to Talking Feds, you type it in the box search, you hit it, you subscribe. That's where I get my legal news from. And then your audio podcast device, search Talking Feds, and Substack, search Talking Feds. Harry and his team, they do an incredible job with really the most experience as anybody out there. So thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben. And back at you for the Meidas mighty #1 media ecosystem.
Let's get to 6 million subscribers.
Oh my, unbelievable. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.